Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 19. We're doing a survey of animals. We're up to vertebrates. And we're up to amphibians. Class Amphibia. Class Amphibia. There's about 8,000, not quite, about 8,000 species of amphibians. Amphi means double or dual. Remember in Biology 1, amphi, we talked about that. Amphi means double or dual. Bio means life. So amphibians have a double life. What is the double life of amphibians? Well, what's the big deal with amphibians? We know that they're born in water, and then as adult they live on land. And they have this double life. When they're born, they kind of look like a fish, tadpole, and then when they grow up, they change into the adult amphibian form. There are three main groups of amphibians: frogs, salamanders, and Sicilians. And I know you know what a frog looks like. You probably know what a salamander looks like. You probably don't know what a Sicilian looks like, and we'll talk about Sicilians in just a little bit. For a long period of time, we talked about this at the end of Biology 1, for about 200 million years, amphibians were the pinnacle of evolution. They were the biggest land-dwelling vertebrates, the only land-dwelling vertebrates. You know, king frog, right? And some of them got to be as big as 3 or 4 meters long. 3 or 4 meters, y'all. We're talking about 15 plus feet long. Specifically, we will be talking about, salamanders. Frogs didn't get that big. But some salamanders definitely did get that big. Huge animals. They have to be born in water. The reason why they have to be born in water is because they do not have a shell around their egg. They have jelly-like eggs, and those jelly-like eggs, just like jelly, will dry out if they are in air. So they have to be born in water. They live their first part of their life in water as tadpoles, and then will metamorphose into the adult frog and then hop out of the pond. They have to stay close to moisture for a couple of reasons. Number one is most of them do a lot of what's called cutaneous respiration. Most of them do a lot of breathing through their skin. If you breathe through your skin, any tissue that you breathe with, and by breathe I mean doing gas exchange, bringing in oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide, any tissue that you breathe with has to stay wet because oxygen has to dissolve into water first, and then you can pull it into your blood. Air, water, blood. All right? So any respiratory membrane, any tissue that you're going to breathe with needs to stay wet. So they have to stay close to moisture because they do lots of cutaneous respiration. They do more cutaneous respiration pretty much than anything else. There's a few groups that don't necessarily do that much, but there's a lot that's all they do. All they do is breathe through their skin. So their skin has to stay moist. So they have to stay close to sources of water. They have to stay close to ponds. They stay in wet, damp leaf litter. They stay in the mud. They have to stay close to water. Our first group of amphibians are frogs. And remember, there's about 7,800 species of amphibians. 6,900 species of them are frogs. So there's about 8,000 species of amphibians and about 7,000 species of them are frogs. Almost all, we're talking about almost 90% of all amphibians are frogs, frog species. Most of them are frogs. Frogs have well-developed ears. They can listen, and they have very well-developed vocal cords. Obviously, when it rains, you can hear the frogs calling. Remember and understand what frog calling is. It is for mate attraction. Who is the one that does the calling? Do they call to each other? And the answer is no, they do not call to each other. The answer is that it's the male. The male specifically calls for the female. An interesting thing is that female frogs are attracted to males with deeper voices. Is that surprising or shocking to you? All things being equal, if a guy has a high squeaky voice or a deep bassy voice, which one is a woman going to like more? High squeaky or deep rich voice? She's going to like the deep rich voice because it means the same thing. It means, as a general rule, it means he's bigger, he's older. And that's what the female frog is looking for. She's looking for a larger frog because larger means older. And that means he's more successful. And obviously frogs, don't have a Benz or, a mansion. But it means that he's been able to live longer because he's older. He's able to get food because he's older. And he's able to fight off disease because he's lived to be older. Female frogs prefer older males because it means he's got good genes. And hopefully those good genes will be passed on to her kids. Animals, for the most part, if they lay eggs, there's two strategies. You have ones that guard the nest and ones that don't. And there are a few amphibians that are nest guarders, but most of them are lay them and leave them. They lay the eggs and you're on your own, Junior. But even then, she still wants the best for her babies. She still wants those babies to survive, even if he's not going to help raise the young. And to be fair, she ain't even going to help raise the young most of the time. She still wants the best. So here we see a bunch of frog species. This is called a poison dart frog, a poison arrow frog. See its beautiful blue color? If you see a beautiful, brightly colored animal like that, what does it probably mean? It means they're not trying to hide. It means that they are trying to advertise. And what they're advertising is that they are toxic. They're called poison dart frogs for a reason. It's because the natives in the areas where these animals are found literally use their skin secretions as a poison that they put on their arrows or on their blowgun darts to poison their prey. So that, again, it's the humans will steal their poison and use that to hunt with. This is a big toad. This is specifically called a cane toad. Toads are frogs. They're just special frogs that can stay farther away from water. Their skin is a little drier. They have better developed lungs. If you do less cutaneous respiration, it's because you've got good lungs. So their skin is drier, which means they do less cutaneous respiration, which means they've got to have better lungs. This is an African clawed frog, and all these little tumors on her back are not tumors, those are her eggs. This is specifically a frog species that does nest guarding. Well, she doesn't guard her nest, but she does guard her eggs by holding them on her back. And the way she does it is she lays the eggs on her back, and then she grows a special flap of skin over them. And then the babies have to hatch out of her back to hatch out of that special flap of skin. But it does look like it's all covered in craters once the babies hatch out of her back. This little guy right here is called a spring peeper. You've heard them. I'm sure you've heard them. In December and January, you'll often hear peep, 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 peep when you're outside, except you might hear thousands of them doing it. Spring peepers are actually about that big. They're tiny, tiny little critters. But why are they calling? Who are they calling for? It's males specifically calling for females. Frogs. Salamanders, not quite 1,000 species of salamanders. Remember, about 7,000 species of frogs, about 700 species of salamanders. So there's, it's 10 to 1, literally 10 to 1 species of frogs compared to salamanders. Salamanders have strong tails for swimming. They have 4 legs that are roughly equal size. Remember, frogs are going to have large back legs. Those large back legs are specifically for escaping predators and swimming. Salamanders use their strong tails for swimming. They are currently the largest amphibian and probably have always been the largest amphibian. Here we see a few salamander species. Some of these are really actually so. All right. Full transparency. A lot of people don't want to hold reptiles and amphibians because they're slimy. Amphibians are slimy. These animals are slimy. So it is kind of gross to hold them. But we talked about that. They have to breathe through their skin. And if they breathe through their skin, the skin has to stay wet. Hence, the skin is slimy. But if we can get past that in their own way, some of these animals are actually really darn pretty. I mean, look at that. Look at that salamander. This is called the marbled salamander. We do have them in Georgia, just not down here where we are. They're in North Georgia. Marbled salamander. This is a red salamander, and it looks kind of kooky, but it itself is actually, in its own way, pretty. This thing right here, this is a newt. Specifically, it's called a red spotted newt. And in their own way, they're kind of pretty. This is a spotted salamander. We do have them around here. These two species, I specifically worked with them when I did my thesis. These guys were fine. Those guys were all right. They're big. Newts, only about so big, but spotteds can be about so big. Pretty big little critters. And then this right here is one of my favorite salamanders of all time, and this is called a slimy salamander. And I understand that's its actual name. Its actual name is slimy salamander. So guess what it's like when you pick these things up? Yeah, they're really darn slimy. But they are beautiful little animals. If you can get super up close and look at the little white dots on their skin, do a Google search for slimy salamander. These little white dots are not just little white dots, they're little white starbursts. They look like beautiful little starbursts, just explosions of white. When you get really down close to them, they're beautiful little critters. And I have to forgive them for being slimy because that's their only defense. And almost all amphibians, that is their only defense. They have no defensive mechanisms. They don't have teeth. They don't have claws. So their only defense is chemical, and the slime is their defense. Specifically, the slimy salamanders, after you hold them, yeah, the slime glues your fingers together, and it's kind of a pain to wash off, but, you know, this is all they got. And they're not very big. Slimies are only about so big. They're pretty little creatures. And all you have to do is wash your hands when you're done, and you'll be fine. Here we see two of the largest salamander species in the world. This animal right here is called a hellbender. They are found in America. They get to be 2 to 3 feet long. So, you know, pretty darn big salamander. This is a giant Chinese salamander, and that thing is actually big enough it could take your hand off. Those things can be 2 to 3 meters long. So you were saying, you know, 6, 7, 8 feet long. Big, 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 big boys. We don't have anything like that in America. We just have hellbenders. Hellbenders, an interesting thing about hellbenders is the group that they belong to, that their genus is called Cryptobranchus. Crypto means hidden. Branch means lung. Hidden lung. When they dissected out hellbenders, they couldn't find their lungs. And they're like, an animal this size cannot live off of cutaneous respiration alone. An animal that size has to have a lung. It can't physically get enough oxygen just by breathing through its skin. And, well, the answer is no, it actually can, but it's because of where they're found. They're specifically found in fast-moving streams. And they have very wrinkly skin. And this wrinkled skin increases the surface area of their skin so they can do more cutaneous respiration. And they live in fast-moving streams, which means the water comes by faster, which means they can do more efficient cutaneous respiration. Hidden lung, Cryptobranchus. Our last group of amphibians are Sicilians. Only a couple hundred species of Sicilians. They live in the tropics. It's inappropriate to say that Sicilians are amphibious snakes, but they're basically amphibious snakes. Or vertebrate worms. It's inappropriate to say either of those things, but that's basically what they are. Vertebrate worms or amphibious snakes. They're just basically salamanders without limbs. They are legless Sicilians. They live in the tropics. I'm not sure if you can see. What this thing is laying on is a bed of moss. So if this thing is laying on a bed of moss, it can't really be much bigger than a pencil. And actually, big Sicilians get to be about that long. They're not very big animals at all. They pretty much live off of worms and insects, grubs, stuff like that. That's what Sicilians live on. Class Amphibia.